how did you get involved, if you can remember the first moment or the first contact that anybody made with you regarding Area 51 and S4 and all that stuff over here?
Well, this is the reason why I brought up the jet car initially. That day, in June '82, the front page of the Los Alamos Monitor newspaper had a picture of me and the jet car on it. And on the flip side of the front page, there's an announcement there that Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb, was going to be giving a lecture down at one of the lecture halls at the lab. And I was anxious to hear the lecture, so thinking there were going to be lots of people there, I got there really early, because at the time I was still working for the lab.
Right.
Or was it? Now I'm trying to remember.
Boy,
I was still working for it. But in either case, I got to the lecture hall real early. And as it turned out, there was nobody there, and now I'm kind of waiting around. About 15 minutes goes by, and I see Ed Teller sitting on a little wall outside the hall reading the front page of the newspaper, which I thought was a perfect segue for me to introduce myself, because, he's sitting there reading about me, and I always wanted to meet the guy.
Of course.
And so I went and introduced myself, and, we talked for a bit, and actually the lecture got delayed a little bit, so we had walked around, and I got to talk to the guy.
What was he like, out of curiosity? I mean, how did he strike you?
He was a very stubborn guy.
Stubborn?
Yeah, and it's a feeling you get speaking to most of the older scientists and physicists at almost every lab I've seen. You can't present them with anything new that they didn't think of first. They're scientists. They're supposed to be open-minded and explore new ideas and things, but there is nobody as closed-minded as a scientist or physicist that's been in the business, for over a decade.
Can you remember the conversation that made you form that opinion?
No, this is an opinion not just based on him, but based on the other scientists and physicists that I've worked with. I mean, they all act exactly the same.
Oh, and you caught the same drift from him.
Yeah, identical. And anyway, I got to see the lecture, and, time passed. And actually, as time went on, I moved out of Los Alamos and moved to Las Vegas. And after some time there, involved in other businesses, I kind of missed being back in the mainstream science field, and started sending out resumes. EG&G, and I wonder who else was around there at the time. But
people might not know, EG&G is, I think they're a contractor for Area 51, for the test site.
For the test site, right. And they're EG&G Measurements. In fact, those are the guys that, in fact, Edinger, who's the E in EG&G, is the guy, I think, that invented the xenon flash bulb, or high-speed flash photography, something like that. Because EG&G started out as the company that came up with a way to photograph the atomic tests, which was really difficult. And
it's
anyway,
a big flash, be very hard to photograph.
Yeah, very high speed, and they wanted to actually see the fireball expanding as it cracks the case and moves apart, and you're talking over 1 million frames a second.
Wow.
And they came up with some fantastic cameras. In fact, I was just told the other day by a movie studio executive that all those old cameras found their way into most of the motion picture companies now, and they use them for special effects, all those atomic bomb cameras.
Yeah, we got a lot of scientific advance from defense, if you wish to call it that, and the defense industry. Of course, they develop the latest stuff, I guess, so that's not a surprise. So you applied to EG&G.
I'd sent a resume to everywhere that was in driving distance. Now, there wasn't a whole lot in Las Vegas, but, I gave it a shot. And what I also did was I sent one to Dr. Teller. who was at Livermore at that time.
Hoping he'd remember you, I'm sure.
Right, and I referenced our meeting and so on and so forth. And, if any suggestions, just pass them along. And I believe it wasn't too long after that that I got a call from EG&G.
Really?
Now, at that time, EG&G was located at McCarran Airport.
Okay.
EG&G Special Projects, and for the people who lived in Las Vegas a long time, they remember that. They've since moved it behind the fence at Nellis Air Force Base.
Okay. And they said to you what?
They told me to come down for an interview. I did, and apparently this was under the recommendation of Dr. Teller, which was fantastic.
Of course.
And
did you know that, by the way, at the time?
I think I found that out after, if I recall.
Okay. So in this interview, what were they? What did they want? What were they after? What were they curious? What did they want to know?
The initial interview was for a lesser position, and I was interviewed by a board of people over a span of about an hour and a half. And
that's some interview.
Yeah, it was pretty intimidating. It was an uncomfortable interview.
Do you recall any of the key questions I asked you? An hour and a half, my God.
Not for that, because I did go back for another one.
Oh.
They did ask me. One of the strange things I found about it was that they weren't asking me that many technical questions. They were asking me questions about my demeanor, about what I do under stress. If I get all angry, do I start throwing screwdrivers and things around? And which was kind of weird. You expect them to, certainly have. Well, they did have some technical questions and test my abilities, but
well, that is though not that irrational a question. I've thrown screwdrivers.
Well, generally I don't. I just give up and walk away for a while.
Yeah, I know.
But I assume what they were doing was just they knew of my work at Los Alamos and the other things I was doing, and they just assumed that it fit the bill. Sure,
but they wanted to know about your demeanor for some reason.
Right, and as it turned out, this all had to do with security, as I found out later. But I went home. I wasn't that thrilled about the interview, and it was several days later I got a call back, and they said, as it turned out, we felt you were overqualified for the job we were offering, and we're pretty sure you would become bored with it after a while. However, there is something else that we have. It's I'm trying to remember verbatim what they said. I believe it's at a remote site on the test site, so you will have to fly out there.
And everybody should know that those flights leave every single day from Las Vegas and go up to the test site, right?
Yeah, at the time they were called the key flights. It says if you violate, national security secrets, it's 10 years in jail and a $10,000 fine. Does that sound familiar to you?
It does.
That before.
It does.
I've signed something like that before, but this was certainly far above and beyond that, which was kind of shocking, actually. But at the time, you pretty much just blow it off and say all this means is that I'm going to be involved in something, extremely interesting, and it's great. So what? I have no intention of violating any rules or, causing any problems. So there's no sweat.
No, I understand. I mean, by that time, you're probably tantalized, thinking this.
Oh, really? I was, this is
pumped
up.
Going to be real fun.
Exactly.
All right.
And really, to my surprise, the security was a little more than oppressive. Generally, you're just assigned a badge and shown the general procedures and things of that sort. This was a little different.
Are you still talking about the facility near Las Vegas, or are you talking about being flown up there now?
No, this is when finally I was flown.
Okay. So
I go to McCarran Airport, right by the EG&G building, and
right.
I'd be flown to Groom Lake. As I landed there the first time, right across from where the plane parked, there's a security office, or was a security office. I believe I spent quite a while there, but, reviewing, how secure things are, so on and so forth. But, this is not where I worked. Where I did work was about, from my estimates, about 10 or 15 miles south of there. We were taken there in a converted school bus, those big Bluebird jobs. It was painted kind of a dark navy blue.
There's a lot of people, Bob, who don't even believe that Area 51 exists, by the way, much less S4. I can tell you...
People don't believe Area 51 exists?
Well, there are a lot of people who don't. But I can tell you, Bob, when you drive up by the VFW here in Pahrump at about 4:30 or 5 in the morning, there's a whole bunch of buses out there, and they've got signs right on the side of the buses. I saw it about a month ago, and it just says Area 51.
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Well, they're not bothering anymore to keep that secret.
I guess. Anyway, so then they take you from Groom Lake, the main facility, and incidentally, Bob, up on my website, I've got a picture, a pretty good one, the best one I've ever seen of the Groom Lake facility, and it shows what appears to be 3 large hangars, with the one in the center perhaps being the largest. Is that your recollection?
I don't recall there being 3, obviously large hangars on the approach in from Las Vegas, that stood out that much above everything else.
Okay.
I recall a huge satellite dish. But for the most part, most of the time I was going there at night and certainly didn't have a run of the place. All I did was get to go in. One time I got to go to the cafeteria. Other than that, it was merely a stop, toward S4. But
did you ever see anything unusual at all, Groom Lake?
The thing I did see that was unusual was some sort of advanced rocket or jet plane. People have called it Aurora. I don't know if it was Aurora or if it even exists. But John Andrews from the Tester Corporation and a few other aviation buffs kind of interviewed me more or less about that. It was something along the lines of an X-15 shaped type of craft. Now, we were driving away from this as it was taxiing, but it was a horrendously loud tearing sound that the engines made. And I think my original description was that it made it sound like the air was tearing, and that's the best description I could give to it. Now, I certainly have heard about the new generation of scramjet engines that have supersonic airflow inside that burn liquid methane and so on and so forth. Whether that was these, I don't know. But I did get a look up the exhaust as we were turning, and it was they were rectangular exhausts with some sort of vanes inside. That's all the information I can give, and what it was, I don't know. But that was the strangest thing I ever saw.
Do you recall the general shape of the aircraft? Was it close to what we would call a lifting body? Even
though the X-15 was a lifting body, it was not a lifting body like you'd see on an F-16 or something where there'd be a lot more wing incorporated into the body. It was more along the lines of a long, slender body, maybe a cross between an F-104 and an X-15 for those people that are familiar with those planes. Very short, stubby wings, which translates to me, high speed of rotation, high flight speed, and things like that. But again, I didn't get a very good look at it. I don't know. It could have been anything, a scientific research vehicle or anything. I'm certainly not claiming that was Aurora. Sometime later, some of those people were down in Rachel, and they heard and recorded a sound that they interpreted as the sky tearing and played it back to me, and it was, in fact, the identical sound. So a couple of years later, it was still operational, whatever that thing was. But that was the only unusual thing I ever saw there. Well, straight across from where the plane parked, head end, straight across from there in kind of a large parking area was the security building, and that's where we picked up the bus and went south. The first time I did go in, and it was an extensive little get-together with the security people there, and signed all kinds of strange forms that...
Were there a lot of people on the bus?
No, not going down to S4. Generally, the person that accompanied me all the time was Dennis Mariani, who was my supervisor at that time. Okay. Well, everything from virtually signing away my constitutional rights. So should anything go wrong as far as me, they would, essentially be judge, jury, and executioner. As far as the authorization to attain the clearance there, that was an order that was signed by President Reagan, which I saw on the desk. I'm trying to remember some of the other paperwork. Beforehand, I gave permission to have my phone lines monitored.
And can you remember any of the wording? I mean, you said you signed something that would allow them, if you blabbed, to be judge, jury, and
Well, I had signed something like that. I mean, that may be a slight exaggeration of how the wording was, but certainly I signed, I'm trying to remember what it was, like a 10-10 agreement. If you've heard that before, I don't remember the exact title of the document, but...
So you sign all the forms, including one to tap your phone, huh?
Right, they did. That was, again, before I went down there. That was down at EG&G, and I gave them permission to do that. But that was only for a limited amount of time. I don't recall how long that was for. And to me, that's kind of a silly thing to do in the first place, because if you're going to monitor my phone, why tell me? It kind of defeats the purpose.
Maybe because otherwise they have to go through some sort of legal procedure and get some sort of court something or another. So
yeah, but you would think in the interest of national security they could circumvent all that, but...
well, they probably do, actually.
Who knows?
When they need to.
I had actually doubted that they were actually doing that. Once in a while everyone hears little clicks and pops and buzzes on their phone, and... I really didn't think that was it.
Yeah, my view is a good tap is one you never hear.
Well, this is my point exactly. Sometime later, I guess we'll get into that. But when things turned sour, actually before they did, they had come to my house 30 minutes after I got off the phone with Gene one day, and we were joking around on the phone. They came to my front door 30 minutes later with a transcript of our conversation and outlined were the questionable phrases that I had spoken. Now, this is amazing to me, considering the closest FBI building down here is on Charleston, and that's an amazing feat. It almost makes me think they had a little mobile setup somewhere.
Well, it is. You're a computer guy, and I've heard, maybe you could confirm this for me, that the NSC has the ability to have supercomputers which virtually are monitoring perhaps even millions of conversations, looking not at the entire conversation, but listening for key words.
Well, that's how they caught that drug kingpin down in, where was it, Panama or Mexico?
That's right, and that was cellular.
They scanned every single phone line, right, and just picked out certain words and grabbed them.
So I encourage my audience to constantly, in the middle of a conversation, just simply say, kilo, kilo.
Art, actually, we say assassination, president, things like that.
Oh, jeez. All right. Well, anyway, so onward to Area S4. I guess is it a paved road or a bumpy little ride?
That's quite a bumpy little ride. It's a dirt road down there, follows along the base of the mountain, and coming up to the facility, it's right off of Papoose Dry Lake Bed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a small mountain range on the side, and built right into the side of the mountain is the installation itself, the S4 installation, and it's composed of hangar doors around one side, and then I believe on the on the south-facing side, there's is the main entrance into the facility.
Were the windows on the bus darkened, or could you see out as you went?
No, you could. The only place you could see out was the front. On the bus, most of the times I had gone down there was the driver, a security guard, and Dennis Mariani. The security guard almost always stood right up front, not sitting down, but holding that bar, which is right by the door on those buses.
Sure.
I don't know if it was in an effort to block my view out there or just to intimidate me and stare at me. But that's how he rode the entire trip down there. So it was always difficult to see exactly where we were. And
what was in between.
Right. Well, there's really nothing in between. It's pretty much desert.
Dennis Mariani, who was he?
He was my supervisor. What his exact position was pretty much unclear to me. He's a stocky guy, smokes a cigar, kind of very military-looking, short blonde hair. It's about the best I could describe him. Maybe, late 30s, early 40s.
Not gregarious, more security-like?
Yes. So I really don't know what his exact function was in the world. But
he didn't wear a military uniform, though, did he, Bob?
No, he didn't.
Clothes.
Right, civilian.
But you can kind of tell military guys.
Yeah, just by the way they look.
And the way they comport themselves and so forth and so on.
But, again, this is my guesstimation of what this guy was about.
Was he your constant shadow? Was he with you all the time?
For the most part, until I learned how things operated there. I guess I shouldn't jump ahead that far yet. Well, I might as well. For the most part, for science to progress anywhere, if you're doing any sort of research whatsoever, one of the things that is vital is free discussion, open and free discussion amongst the people that are working on the project.
Okay, right.
Well, obviously, it's how ideas are bounced off other people, and
that was
the only way things can progress.
Wasn't that one of the main contentious points during the development of the atomic bomb in the Manhattan Project? Everything was compartmentalized, and
the military just loves to do that.
And the scientists just hate it because they want to bounce ideas off each other.
Exactly.
So you're saying, really, in 1989, that was still going on?
Well, probably. Well, I don't know. How would I know how bad it was during the atomic age? But it was very oppressive. So much so that our job was very compartmentalized. Every aspect was split into groups of people. Groups of people are quite literally two people. You work on the buddy system. In other words, the only person I can talk to, the only person I can discuss anything with, the only person I can relate to is the one person who I work with. Any other aspect of the project, any other questions are simply not to be asked. So immediately you're interfering with your progress in that if whatever you're doing interacts with anything else anywhere, you've run into a block wall.
You don't even really know if you're the first person to come down and be assigned this task, do you?
Exactly.
There
in fact,
could have been
I was
others.
told that I wasn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But, you really have no idea what's going on. And I'm sure if you found that, Part A connects to Part B, which we're not allowed to see, I'm sure there would be some way to gain some of that information, but...
Bob, not only were you not the first person assigned that task, but this might be an interesting point to tell them why you were told you were hired.
No, that's true. I was... actually, one of the questions I've always had is, why did they hire me? Certainly for this project, I would not be the most intelligent, the most resourceful person that they could possibly hire out of all the people at Los Alamos or anywhere else in the world for that matter. So I've always wondered exactly why they would have picked me.
And so why then did they?
I still don't know. I have always wondered this. I've ran a lot of things through my mind, different possible scenarios, and they really, none of them make any sense. Was it because Edward Teller just thought I was a nice guy and essentially juiced me into the position?
It sounds, it sounds that way.
Yeah, but, in a project like this, why would something like that happen where every person counts? You're talking in a project where there are only actually 22 active people working on it.
Yeah, but when Teller speaks, the military listens.
Yeah, that's true, but I didn't know him well enough. As far as my scientific background, it was actually fairly limited. I was working at Los Alamos on working with the accelerator at that point, so it really wasn't a propulsion-based job, anything to do with, what I was about to have my hands on.
Here we are at Area S4 south of Groom Lake, and I guess by now you're in great anticipation, Bob, wondering what you're going to be doing.
I was just about to make a point before we broke, and I can't remember it.
Well, that's why you have Gene Huff. Gene?
Gene doesn't remember either.
Gene doesn't remember either.
Boy, I think my short-term memory.
He was talking
contagious.
right before we broke about it. He had no idea why they chose him of all the people in the world. But that's
well, actually, Gene, you had said, why don't you tell him, Bob, why they chose you?
Yeah, he was. I was implying something else, and in other words, I was telling him, reminding him of why there were vacancies, why they needed to hire someone, why someone wasn't in his slot already.
And we were talking about the fact that he was not the first one necessarily.
Right.
And that makes sense. In other words, if they had something they didn't understand, I can imagine they would bring in an array of people of different disciplines to take a look-see.
Well, that might have been the case, but yeah, to this day I can't figure out why. If certainly you look at my record and the way I approach things and the work I had done before was a little more renegade, and maybe that's what they were doing. Was looking for someone that would approach a project from a different road. And
are you able to talk about what you did at Los Alamos?
I did several things. Initially, I was working on the polarized proton target on the accelerator. The accelerator there at Los Alamos is a linear accelerator. It stretches about, if I remember, about a half mile, and it's one of the more unique setups in that instead of running a single experiment on the output of the accelerator, the beam is split into different areas. And all these different areas are, I don't know really if they're leased or rented to other countries or other scientists, but several other people and other groups from all over the world essentially can conduct experiments simultaneously. At different times they'll fire different particles down the target for different lengths of time, and everyone can run their own experiments and see what's going on. There was also some Star Wars development done there.
Okay. I'm sitting here listening, trying to imagine any application for what you were about to do, and you don't. At
S4.
Yeah.
There's none. There was no direct connection at all. This is one of the things that has perplexed me forever.
But how could there be?
Maybe this was the point that I was going to make. In fact, it is. It just popped back in my mind. What was strange about the interviews I had was, certainly there was some technical questions here and there. They essentially knew my background already. But what they were most concerned was what I had done in my spare time, which I found to be very unusual.
Now, what had you done in your spare time? You had worked with propulsion systems in your spare time, right?
Right. I mean, they were essentially concerned with more of my, for lack of a better word, playtime than they were with what I was or what I had currently done.
All right, well, let's take this back to Edward Teller. When you had a conversation with Edward Teller, did you talk about your playtime? Did you talk about...
Well, I was talking about at that time the static ramjet engine that was, in fact, that was in the front of the paper. So we were talking about, in fact, at that time I had filed patents on it, of how the device operated without the need for fuel pumps and things of that sort because of the type of fuel it used.
What is a static ramjet engine?
It was an offshoot of a pressure jet engine, which was invented by Eugene Gluharf, who was also coincidentally the inventor of the rocket ejection seat that's used on all fighter aircraft.
Indeed.
He developed that, I believe, in the 50s, and in the 70s I had run into him, and really, as a kid back then, started working in my spare time as I went to Pierce College at that time, working to improve on the design. I came off with an offshoot of the design, which was a little more complicated, but produced a lot more thrust. The basic design of the engine is it has no moving parts at all. One property of propane is that it sticks to hot metal, This eliminates all the needs for flame holders and things of that sort inside the engine, which makes it more complicated. I'm trying to think of a couple other points about it. It was a pretty different design as far as jet engines go. And with the changes I made, it was essentially a different type of engine. And after I had gone past the development of it on a test stand, I built a slightly larger one and installed it in the back of a car. And it was a convenient mobile test setup, as opposed, well, and additionally, it was something kind of interesting to play around with in the desert.
Sure.
Which is where the whole article came from in the newspaper. But
all right, well, then I think you've answered your own question.
But someone playing around with jet engines really doesn't qualify him or her to work on something of extraterrestrial origin.
No, but then again, who does have qualifications to go work on something?
Well, there's a point. There's a point.
So I can understand, and here's how I would, based on what you said, I'll bet here's what happened. The article in the paper, the conversation with Edward Teller, and probably his suggestion, which probably amounts to more of an order, that you'd be a good person, kind of a rebel, to go take a look at the stuff they had at Area S4. That would be my best guess. That's a pretty good guess. What do you think, Gene?
I agree. I think that Edward Teller's word carried all of the weight in the world, and I also agree with you that who would have a background, who would be qualified to work on a gravity propulsion system and an antimatter reactor and the things Bob later ran into. And Bob's a comprehensive problem solver, has a background in physics and electronics and in propulsion, and I can understand why they'd hire him.
Well, yeah, if you're going to go, if you really have extraterrestrial craft and you're trying to figure out what makes them go, then you're going to go find somebody who works out of the box. In other words, is a bit of a rebel and kind of works out of the normal box and experiments and tinkers and is interested in propulsion. That's the kind of person you're going to go for, because there's nobody out there with specific qualifications for that job.
Yeah, obviously.
In addition to probably other considerations of a psychological profile and,
Yeah, that they were also very concerned with.
Your psychological profile?
Yeah, they were concerned with how I handle stress. In fact, I remember one of the questions was, have you ever thrown tools around in the lab or anything to that effect? And I thought these were very strange questions for what what we were talking about. But in either case, I got the job and wound up there. But
haven't you ever thrown tools?
No, actually, I haven't.
I have. I've kicked radios, too. One all the way across the room, put my foot through it. Anyway, so then you seem qualified in most every way, as much as one could be qualified for that. So here you come to S4, and were you immediately led into this area where these craft were?
No, absolutely not. In fact, the first day there, I went in, and I think my first stop was to go to the medical office there. I believe there was a nurse in there. I'm pretty sure that was my first stop, and I had to go through a series of what I was told were allergen tests.
Allergen tests?
Yeah. They took my arm and drew a little graph on it and pricked each little area in my arm with different little needles.
No kidding.
And, in fact, I was not permitted back to work, I think, for 2 weeks until there was a reaction, or if there was to be a reaction, with any of the substances they put on my skin. And they said, we're working with some extremely exotic materials here that we're not all that familiar with, and we want to know if there's going to be any problem with it. And I said, well, that's, again, odd, but acceptable. And I was also given an injection there too, which was a wide spectrum. What did they call it?
Antibiotic?
No, it wasn't a wide spectrum antibiotic. It was a wide spectrum something or other.
It's always good to know what they're shooting you with.
Yeah. I thought, now, I mean, there have been so many, I'm sure, which we'll get into later, so many ridiculous stories, offshoots of what actually had happened to me. People said, oh, well, they injected you with Thorazine or so on, or this was the memory drug that wiped out your memory so you could only remember back and forth, and, so on and so forth. But, I'm pretty sure that wasn't the case. This was, they were mainly concerned about the, here you're dealing with actual extraterrestrial materials. And if we're going to be crawling around on them, taking things apart and having contact with them, they imagine they want to make sure that the people working on it are fairly safe. Well, that, in one hand, weighed against the fact that, don't forget, the United States government fed fallout to people from time to time.
You bet.
And, did other strange things.
When you originally told your story, Bob, years ago, that wasn't known. Hazel O'Leary was not around yet, and everybody regarded your story as absolutely incredible, beyond belief. But then when Hazel O'Leary stepped out and said the following occurred, everybody went into kind of a stupor and said, my God, we did that? So your story isn't so out of line.
Well, a lot has actually changed in the past 10 years. If you remember, 10 years ago, too, the predominant theory about how gravity propagates in any physics textbook, related to gravitons. Mm-hmm. And now the predominant theory is gravitational waves, which is exactly how some of and some scientists and physicists of that time, pointed out one of the many reasons they say the reason this story can't be true was that this was absolutely ridiculous, so on and so forth. And now it's spoken of as a matter of fact. This is how gravity propagates through space. And it's just interesting to see how things slowly, over the span of a decade, quietly change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I do keep an eye on.
Yes.
But
and I take it your arm didn't break out inappropriately, so you passed.
No, I think it did develop a small eruption somewhere, but it was nothing to be concerned about, or so I was told. So we just proceeded from there.
As you know, there is a group of people suing the government over illnesses they have suffered from work they did at Area 51, and that is proceeding quietly in court. It's not going to be so quiet when it goes to trial, but that's underway now. So, indeed, there are some pretty exotic materials up there.
Actually, you just reminded me of something. When was that, Gene? When, was it right after that where I collapsed from the kidney?
Oh.
You remember that? And,
right.
And was that there or after I had left the project?
No, you were still in the project.
So that was right after that.
Right after they did these tests and gave him a shot.
It's kind of surprising. I forget that.
Drink a strange substance, and
all I remember is that you were at a Toyota dealer or something like that, and
he was in such pain. His kidneys hurt so bad he thought he was going to die. And to that point, Bob had never had any health problems or had never had any sedatives or painkillers, and the doctor gave Bob a shot of Demerol. And I called him, and he was floating on cloud nine. It wasn't even coherent, and I came to his house to see what was wrong, and then he was literally high from a painkiller they gave him just so he could stand the pain in his kidneys. So whatever went through his system certainly stuck there.
Yeah, so there was an adverse reaction to something.
Do you think that was, well, of course you have no way of knowing whether it was the allergy test they put you through or the shot they gave you?
Or wasn't it an amazing coincidence that,
but he had no prior kidney problem.
Yeah, I mean, it is,
Well, I take it you went to the doctor.
I did, yeah.
What did he say?
I don't remember. I think he said, he gave me a shot of painkiller, Demerol, I believe it was, and he took a urine sample, a blood test, and he asked if I had any previous problems, anything strange, and obviously I said no. Certainly didn't mention anything about getting an injection
right.
at a strange place in the middle of the desert.
Right.
Didn't they do X-rays or a CAT scan or something and find
not a CAT scan? They did they did just an X-ray to see if there was any blockage. But
there was nothing.
A day later, or I think even the next morning, everything was fine. The X-rays came back negative, and I believe the blood work came back negative too, as did the urine sample. So, in fact, I think his conclusion was that perhaps I had passed a small stone, and wound up in my bladder, and then it would probably hurt coming out again. But that never occurred, and whether or not that scenario is correct, again, is just speculation. But I don't know, that you just stirred that up in my memory. I don't think I've even mentioned that since it.
That's right. That's how little bits and pieces come back. How's your health now, by the way, and since then? Okay.
Oh, fine, no problem.
All right. So anyway, you pass all their little tests.
Pass all that. The next thing to happen was that I was led into a room with quite a number of little briefing packages, briefing papers, or these range from 2 pages to about 5 pages, little folders with different aspects of the project that I was working on. This was, I believe, the part of the first day and the second day that I was working there.
So they just sat you down at a table and had you begin to read about...
Yeah, what these were just basic overviews of what each group was doing, just essentially to give you knowledge of what the other facets of the project were about.
A general overall knowledge.
Right, had no specifics whatsoever,
Figures.
But if for instance, there was a group with metallurgy, so on and so forth.
Here we are, you're in a little room with a bunch of briefing papers giving you more or less an outline, but not specifics of the work being done on... Actually, at that point, did they state what it was that was being worked on?
Well, at this point, yeah. This is the first time I really knew exactly what I would be doing. And this is where it was stated that the project was essentially that of back engineering an extraterrestrial craft.
That must be quite a line to read.
Well, it was, and it was also hard to believe, because certainly going into the project, I was basically a nuts and bolts guy, and certainly didn't believe in UFOs and thought everyone was crazy that even considered the topic. I certainly believe that there was life elsewhere. Certainly life can exist on other planets, other galaxies, other solar systems, but I just found it very hard to believe that there was any intelligent life visiting Earth. And
you had never had any close encounter of the third kind?
No, and I thought people were basically crackpots that thought so.
Whacked out.
But also, Art, he was into science and technology, and he certainly wasn't well-read. I mean, he had never heard of the, Betty and Barney Hill case, or he didn't know anything about the Roswell crash or anything along those lines. I mean, he wasn't interested and he didn't pursue it. And if you all remember, really a decade ago, I mean, some of that information was available, but certainly wasn't prevalent to the point that it is today with websites and movies and television shows.
Oh, indeed. As a matter of fact, before we proceed, Bob, I'd be very, very interested to hear your reaction. I have interviewed now twice, very rare interviews, by the way, hours-long interviews, with Colonel Philip Corso. And I'm kind of interested to get your reaction to Colonel Corso's revelations about the back engineering and insertion into American industry he did of artifacts from the Roswell crash. Were you surprised to hear about that?
This is the first I'm hearing about this.
Ha! Is that right?
What is inserted into American industry?
Philip J. Corso, Colonel.
Believe it or not, I really am completely uninterested in the topic UFOs and never follow it at all.
All right, well,
I'm in the dark as far as all this is.
This is a man who was given the job. He's now 82 years of age, by the way. He was given the job of, he was actually handed a filing cabinet by a general, and he was given a job of figuring out what some of these things were and introducing them into American industry, specifically Bell Labs and some others at the time. And these were artifacts from Roswell, and he is very, very credible. He wrote a book called The Day After Roswell.
What specifically? What devices?
Devices that led to, and it's going to be hard, night vision scopes, for example, fiber optics, for example, the transistor, for example, a lot of leaps that, by the way, particularly the transistor, there's not much of a paper trail for. If you look back at the development in Bell Labs of the transistor, there's not a big paper trail. Yes, it arrived, but there's not a big paper trail about how it arrived.
I'm so skeptical of something like that. The reason being, well, let me tell you, certainly you've seen pictures of the first transistor. We know it was developed at Bell Labs. We know there were a couple of guys working on it. But you know what the first transistor was. It was essentially just, it was more along the lines of a diode, just a P-N and a P-junction just on a big slab of silicon. It really couldn't do anything. Certainly, if we had been given that advanced technology at that time, wouldn't it have been something a little more down the road to look at that?
Art, I actually gave him UFO magazine so he could read about it, but he doesn't read about UFOs. So.
I understand. It really is true. People don't believe this about you, Bob. They think you are the guru of ufology. And
boy, have you got the wrong guy.
And it just isn't true.
No. Please.
You see, I remember the interview I did with you before. I remember it very well. Anyway, so here you are reading about all of this, and you get sort of an overview of it all, and probably by... What are you thinking by then? I mean, is your mouth hanging open? Extraterrestrial?
It is, to some extent, and another part of me is beginning to wonder whether or not this is true at all, or if this is some sort of psychological test. Everything else was so way out, essentially. Maybe this is, another game that we're playing.
Maybe they're just trying to determine what reactions of people in science would be to extraterrestrial craft or the fact of extraterrestrial presence of any kind at all.
Right, and certainly all these thoughts had gone through my mind.
I'm sure you know all the questions that people would ask if I started picking up phone lines now. So what about being inside that craft? What do people generally ask, and how do you respond?
Well, first of all is the overall description inside. Entering the craft is, like I said, certainly uncomfortable for an adult human being.
You realize that you're not in a place that was designed for humans.
Exactly. And it certainly is different from anything that you're familiar with. And what I mean to say about that is everything is basically one color. Normally, any area you're surrounded in is always different textures, different colors, so on and so forth. The inside of the craft is essentially all a dull pewter aluminum color, very metallic looking. There are no sharp right angles anywhere, and the description I've given before is basically the craft looks like it was just injection molded, essentially like the model was. There are no seams anywhere. Everything inside the craft looks like it was fashioned out of wax, heated for a short time, and then cooled to where everything basically melted into what was next to it, what it was sitting on. That's about the best description I can give as to how the inside looked.
Seamless
and very unusual. Again, no right angles anywhere. The structure of the craft, the skin from the outside was smooth. Inside, this is very difficult to describe, but if you can picture yourself inside a disc of a flying saucer shape, and you're inside looking at the wall surrounding you, there was an additional structure, kind of a secondary wall, There was kind of repetitive archways that looks like it was either for structural integrity or, as we later found out, something to do with the waveguide and the gravity amplifiers themselves. But if you have the box there you're looking at, you notice what I'm saying is kind of difficult. There's a little booklet that came in there that has a nice cutaway view of the craft, but it's very difficult to describe without drawing a picture or seeing something visual. There are 3 levels to the craft. When you enter into the main level, and that's basically what you see. As far as what's on the main level, well, first of all, the dimension of the craft is about 52 feet in diameter, about 16 feet high. That's just the overall measurement. Now, back on the inside of the craft, what you'll see in the center of the craft is the reactor itself. Extending from the reactor up through the top of the craft is the waveguide. It kind of looks like a little chimney, more or less. Surrounding the reactor in the center of the craft are 3 seats. These seats all face one direction. Also near these 3 seats are the 3 gravity amplifiers themselves. They look like consoles, just solid rectangular objects. When I say consoles, I don't mean there's any buttons, lights, or anything of that sort. And in fact, there were no buttons, lights, switches, or wiring in the entire craft.
Really?
Really. That's also quite an impressive feat.
No levers, no buttons, no lights, no switches.
However, I did not get to go in one part of the craft, so I really can't say what was there. But I do have a good idea as to what was. Now, this was all on the center level. Immediately underneath, there's a small breakaway part of the floor as you walk in to the craft over to the left. It's a collapsible hexagonal, very unique doorway. People have asked me, have you ever seen anything in any of these crafts, any of the technology that could be used today, something simple? And that's certainly one of them. Aside from the high-tech gravitational propulsion system, so on and so forth, something very, very simple to understand and easy. And anyone that's taken a 6-pack of beer or bottles or anything like that, you'll notice that if you push on the sides you take all the bottles out, you push on the sides of the box, it all collapses flat.
Yes.
And the floor itself was hexagonal in shape and made of little square hexagons like that, of thin metal, with a little notch cut out. So basically, to operate it, you just stuck your hand in the notch and pushed, and the entire thing collapsed flat and left a hole open. However, when it's, I'm getting tangled with my words here, because there's so many other things going through my mind. When it's extended and the opening is closed off, it's a very strong structure, because you're standing on the top of hexagons. The metal is relatively thick, even though you kind of have an idea of what I'm trying to present here?
I absolutely do. Of course, I understand how it derives the strength, yes.
So yes, it's very easy to collapse one way, but that's one simple thing I thought would find uses somewhere, somehow. Something that could be made right now. In fact, I've fashioned one out of thin metal. I have absolutely no use for it, but it's just one of those strange things. I've never seen anything like it, and it's certainly something that could be, used in some sort of architecture somewhere.
Now, the craft you were in had all of its, the generator, the amplifier.
Right, this was all on the first level.
Everything was intact.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, let me take that back. One of the amplifiers was removed.
All right.
On this craft. When you do collapse this little porthole, you can fit your body through, at least the upper part of it, and look underneath. This is the lower level of the craft. This is where the emitters, what I sometimes call the gravity amplifiers, hang down. These are three of the cylindrical-shaped black objects, 2 foot in diameter, 4 feet long, that actually emit gravitational waves from them.
Like a microwave horn.
Right. They are positioned directly underneath the larger rectangular gravity amplifiers on the first level and are, in fact, connected to them. The actual physical connection between the emitters and the subflooring above it, again, is something very interesting. It's a short piece of pipe, I'd say, maybe 12 inches longer, maybe slightly, 12 inches long, maybe a little longer than that. But this mounting flexes in any direction, but it's a solid piece of pipe. It's something very, very unusual, and we see the same thing being used on the waveguide to the reactor. From what we could see, by applying an electric charge to different parts of this structure, it would bend quite easily.
Really?
Yeah, it's again something very difficult to describe without drawing it exactly how this operated. But it was not made of in a telescopic form where you'd see something like a car antenna where it would collapse down on. Each section would collapse down onto one another. It was a solid piece, if you can imagine just a solid piece of pipe, and applying an electric charge to it and having the pipe bend but remain rigid after it had done so. Anyway, this compromised composed the focusing system for these three amplifiers. They received signals from other parts of the craft. The amplifiers would focus in on a certain point, and this is basically how the amplifiers were aimed. And the craft had, again, it's kind of a lengthy explanation, but there were two different modes the craft we found would operate in. One is called Omicron, and one is called Delta. The Omicron configuration was the standard operating mode of the craft, and it's where it used one single amplifier to maintain its elevation in the sky. One of the other amplifiers was rotated 90 degrees and essentially pointed straight out ahead of the craft. So with one amplifier working, it essentially produced an anti-gravitational pillar to stand on. With the amplifier that was rotated 90 degrees, instead of what we would normally think along the lines of propulsion, where a jet would essentially exhaust material, hot gases out the back,
right?
Where we would normally think along the lines of a propulsive force. What the craft did was essentially create a distortion in front of it.
A distortion now.
A gravitational distortion.
Is that like sort of creating a well, in effect?
Exactly. It would create a little distortion, a divot in time-space, if you want to call it that. A well is a good analogy, too, to where the craft would actually, this is kind of the low-performance mode, if you want to give it a name, but where the craft would actually continuously slide downhill.
Yes.
A very awkward, strange mode of propulsion. I mean, we have nothing that would even really relate to something like that. But it's kind of backwards, if you see what I'm saying.
I do.
The other mode of propulsion...
And you, before we go to that, you would imagine this mode of propulsion to be used in what configuration? In other words, in an atmosphere, for example?
In an atmosphere, just maneuvering around small objects.
Source of gravity, probably near a planet or moon, would you say?
I would imagine so, yeah. I don't think it would be used in space. There would be some, by definition of this mode, it requires some force, some large amount of gravity to be acting on the craft. So you would have to be near some sort of gravitational body.
All right.
I would imagine as it was hovering around the ground, this is what would it...
All right, makes sense. And then there was another mode.
The other mode is the delta configuration, and this is how it normally travels through space and makes large jumps. The craft flies with the belly facing the direction you want to go, not as you would normally see the craft in a science fiction movie.
Ah.
The gravity amplifiers are all brought up to power, and they're focused on a single point. This point now becomes an area of intense gravitational distortion, many, many times more than what we were talking about before. And this is where the true warp drive comes into effect. This is where you actually bend, you begin to distort space and time. And instead of the craft actually flying, you're basically distorting the fabric of space around the craft and move without actually traveling. You're not moving in a linear...
If I'm visualizing this correctly, it's kind of like the other mode, except far more intense, and you're constantly moving toward this warp, or with this warp. I don't know which way to think about it.
Well, you actually become part of the other space. It's a pretty wild concept, but something that it really isn't unknown to us. As I've stated before, to most people this sounds like wild science fiction. However, we know most of these things are possible. We know, for example, as I stated in that tape, that we can see stars that are behind the sun. And the reason for that is the intense gravitational field of the sun bends not just light, but it bends space around the sun, and we can see some things behind it. We know that we know space, gravity, and time are all interrelated. We know this for a fact. We know that around areas of intense gravitational fields, time essentially slows down. I mean, it's certainly been theorized that if one was to orbit a black hole, an area of tremendous gravitational distortion of gravity will, for instance, that time would virtually stop.
Right.
So with all these things interacting, this is how you can travel a great distance with essentially no time elapsing. First of all, you're bending space towards you. By doing that, you're actually slowing time. Not to say that this is a time machine, it's just a byproduct. Whenever you produce a gravitational field, whenever you're around an intense gravitational field, time slows. It's just
Bob, did you discern all of this yourself after long examination? Oh, no, this was... Okay, they gave you this then.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So then you're in the craft. Then your job, I guess, is to go back to the gravity amplifier and the rest of it that they've already got assembled and try and back engineer the thing or try to make it work with materials that we have here on Earth. Is that correct?
Basically so. Well, basically is to start at the very beginning and look at the reactor and try and see how from ground level the device operates. And this is where apparently I came in to the project.
Gene, basically the silent one right now, sort of helping out as he can. Let's see, Bob. In the interest of time, because we could spend 10 hours with this. Perhaps not before you fell asleep, but...
Well, we did make some coffee here. I detected I started rambling and not saying anything, so hopefully this will help. We are about 3 hours past my bedtime.
I see. I appreciate it. The nation appreciates it. This really is an incredible story. Now, briefly, you went to work, obviously, trying to back-engineer this.
Right.
How far did you get and what did you learn?
Well, not very, and I need to digress for a moment here, and this is where I learned one of the reasons why I was hired. Initially, our work started on the reactor. We figured that's the center point of everything, and this is where we should really concentrate our efforts, and apparently that's what the people before me did, too. Apparently, there was an attempt to analyze the operation of one of these reactors, and I got to read the notes that the gentleman before me had left. There was a fatality, or actually 3 fatalities, if I remember, when they attempted to do this. For some reason, they attempted to get into the reactor while it was in operation under load, and it was never very clear in their notes as to why anyone decided to do that. However, again, in the interest of time, I'll cut this short, but they did attempt to do that. The reactor did explode, and the gentlemen were killed. I was to replace one of these people.
Great.
So this is...
Did anybody at any point suggest that you go in?
Oh, no. I think this is something... I think they reached a point of frustration, couldn't get anywhere, and, went on from there. Again, this didn't sound very sensible to me, but this was a story that was relayed to me, and just something I thought I'd pass along. Also, let me add one other point, too, that has really nothing to do with this, but we were also talking about static on the phone a few minutes ago.
Yes.
Coincidentally, earlier today, now I have no cordless phones in the house. I was on the phone with Jean, and my neighbor comes to the door and tells me that she can hear my conversation on the phone on her cordless phone. I found that kind of hard to believe, so I picked up her cordless phone and listened and could hear everything fine on mine. I mean, that's very unusual, to say the least.
And Art, he called me, and I could literally hear his neighbor talking on a cordless phone in her house from my house.
What you need, then, is a sweep of your house.
Absolutely. Well, I called Sit and Tell, and they should be here tomorrow, too, but, what an odd coincidence that 10 years ago, I certainly haven't had any problems like this for a long time, but that is pretty unusual. Anyway, back to what we were talking about.
Sure. 3 who went down before you, 3 who died, so there you are. What do you do?
Well, basically followed in their footsteps up to that point. What we did find was that the reactor operated, at least the lower part of the reactor, the base plate, operated like a little cyclotron. And in fact, the first cyclotrons were almost exactly that size. They accelerated particles to a high speed in a circular fashion along this base plate. The particles were then diverted by electrical and magnetic fields up into a target area, which is what was inside the domed part of the reactor. These, and this is now where we get into some exotic material. One of the elements we identified in the reactor, we then found, again, we had identified
an element,
a super heavy element, one that doesn't naturally occur on Earth, and certainly one that we haven't synthesized. This element was identified as 115. Now, normally, the higher level elements, the ones that we have produced in accelerators, decay in a fairly short time. In this case, what we were seeing was a stable element, one that was not undergoing any radioactive decay, which is very unusual. However, again, this is something that science and chemists have already theorized, that there should be an island, essentially an island of stability for elements around the 114, 115, 116 area. However, we certainly haven't been able to produce anything that high up on the periodic chart, but apparently, this is what we were observing.
How much of this element 115 was available?
200. Well, there were 223 grams in the craft, in the reactor.
223 grams. I heard a story, I think it may have been from John Lear, that, and this jumps us way ahead, but that you somehow got some of element 115 out of that area. Is that true?
I really don't want to comment on that.
All right, I didn't think so. John didn't want to say much about it either, but that was rumor. We'll let it stand as a rumor. All right, so element 115, something that we don't have yet. I think we have progressed a little bit up the scale, but we're certainly not at 115. Where are we now? What is our...
I believe the last isolated was 112.
112.
And
yep.
most of the more recent work has been done in Darmstadt, Germany.
All right.
In fact, I believe their plan to produce element 116 is coming up next. I think they plan on. I think it was californium and calcium or something. Do you remember that, Gene?
Yes, I think they were going to fuse curium with calcium, and they were going to end up with element 116, which they then thought would decay in a chain of unknown nuclides and see where the island of stability actually settled.
But they are very close to attempting to pierce that island of stability and seeing what's going to happen. However, producing one or two atoms of it really isn't going to let them determine how the substance is going to react, but at least they're there. They're almost to the point now where they can begin to look at some of these exotic substances.
Right. There are a lot of people waiting to see if they can perform any experiments or find this, gravity A that Bob alludes to. But really, when you read, and I'm certainly a lay person, when you read on these, for instance, the website for the Lab for Heavy Ion Research in Darmstadt, Germany, you can see that they actually detect these atoms when they make them, and getting an atom or two, it doesn't put them anywhere near having a quantity of it that you could hold in your hand and actually study for any macro scale type effect.
You bet. Bob, how long were you then at S4 doing your work?
It was from December of 88 to April of 89.
December of 88 to April of 89. Okay. What went wrong? When did the whole thing begin to go to sour, and why?
Boy, there's a long story. Okay, the Reader's Digest, this story.
Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, a Reader's Digest version of this, which is typically longer than the entire story itself.
Do you want me to tell it?
If you got a shorter version than I do, well, go ahead.
All right, how about this? At what stage of work were you when it began to go bad?
Well, very early. Well, go ahead, Gene. Give it a try.
Well, Bob had been on an on-call basis, and right when he got to the point where he's told you about up to this point, they stopped calling him into work. And this was very frustrating. He wasn't a fun guy to be around. And what had happened is when he, as he told you before, he had to sign documents allowing them to monitor his phone and fax and computer and anything that came into his house over a phone line. And to make a long, sad story short, Bob's wife was having an affair, and they found out. And when they gave him his security clearance, they deemed him to be financially stable, emotionally stable, and just generally stable. And so now they knew that he was going to be having some emotional problems, and they stopped calling him. Ultimately, they heard his wife admit that she had had an affair to her mother over the phone, and she ultimately told Bob. And they called him in and yanked his security clearance, saying that they deemed him to be a sure candidate for emotional instability, and that he could reapply again in 6 to 9 months. So
I've never heard any of this before.
You've never heard this?
No.
Yeah, that's the reason that he lost his clearance. It had nothing to do with him.
All right. Well, you had signed all these papers, Bob. What motivated you to go public? I mean, that's weird in itself. I mean, why did you go public? Surely you had to worry about your life, you had to worry about your career, and I don't know whether it's everybody knows, but you were virtually, the modern term is erased. Your educational records were erased. a lot of the work you did in New Mexico was erased, save for one little mistake. I think your name was, and still is, recorded in a phone book, isn't it?
Right. For the most part, for the most part, everything was.
What was it they missed? Where was that? A phone book where?
That was, it was an old phone book in Los Alamos.
Los Alamos.
However, certainly they couldn't erase the, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the newspaper article at that time clearly stated on the front page of the local Los Alamos newspaper that I was a physicist working in Los Alamos labs.
Yes.
So, they certainly couldn't go back and make that disappear. But
they made a lot disappear, didn't they?
Yeah.
However, Art, they did lie to begin with. As you know, George Knapp, for your listeners, is at that point in time was a news anchor for the CBS affiliate here in Las Vegas.
Channel 8.
Yes, and he had extensive correspondence with Los Alamos as well as Kirk Meyer, which was one of the subcontractors that Bob worked for. And they all denied. Kirk Meyer did say he was issued a Z number, which was a number required to be an employee and to get a paycheck. But none of them had said that they retained records that far back. And at this point in time, it was only, 5 or 6 years earlier. It wasn't, 10 years like it is now. And that they didn't retain any records at all. And George gave them numerous chances. He said, "Are you sure you have no record of Bob Lazar?" He asked Kirk Meyer, "Are you sure you have no record of Bob Lazar?" Mm-hmm. They denied, and then that's when Bob came up with the Los Alamos phone book with his name and station number in there, and then also he had a copy of the Los Alamos newspaper from 1982.
And how did they react to that?
We're also talking about two people. When I was initially hired on, I was hired on via a headhunter, essentially, for Los Alamos.
Sure.
And I worked, like I said, the initial time you work for anyone in a secure job, you have that time before your clearance goes through, and that's when I worked for Kirk Meyer, and then later became hired on directly at Los Alamos. However, both people, either quote-unquote lost their records or just flatly denied the existence of me even working there.
Well, what pushed you to go public?
What pushed me to go public essentially was fear.
Fear of what? Fear of death? Fear of prosecution? Fear of
just fear in general. I imagine you can add them all together, and that was essentially what I was feeling at the time. At that time, I had nothing other than what I had said to anybody. For the most part, if I suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth,
nobody would have noticed.
Well, not only would nobody would have noticed, I certainly have friends and family that would miss me, but no one would have known exactly what happened. And
people disappear all the time.
Right.
Well, especially in Las Vegas. So I at least wanted to get what was going on out in the open. And I believe it worked very well. It was essentially a pushback against all the force that was leaning on me. Where if I thought if I just went on in a subdued fashion on television and maybe just said a little bit, and just kind of gave a little shove back, they would lay off. And it was a big gamble, but it worked exactly the way I wanted it to.
Also, Art, at this point, when he was trying to show those around him what was going on, is when he took people like me and his wife and John Lear out to the BLM land outside of Area 51, and we actually saw one of the discs tested in the sky. Now, Bob did this after he told us the story. After he was in trouble and in fear for his life, he told those around him the story, and obviously we were a little apprehensive when a friend said, we thought he was just working in some project for the government. None of us really cared what he was doing. And, so he wanted to prove that not that we thought he was lying, but it's still an outrageous story to tell your wife and friends and say, oh, by the way, I'm working on flying saucers.
Sure, and John has told me the story of the trip up to Area 51, and there is video to support your claim as well.
Right.
Plenty of video. When the screenplay that you are now developing that is going to tell this whole story, Gene, when will this be manifested into something that we can go out and watch at the movies?
Well, I don't think Steven Spielberg could tell you that. The fact is, the first movie deal, literally the president of the studio came to meet Bob and said, I'm going to make this movie.
Do you want to help or not?
Yeah, and 5 years later, that movie's still not on the screen, so I would not be so bold as to give a date, but these people do seem serious, and if they could wave a magic wand, they'd like to have it on the screen in the summer or fall of 1998, but I mean, who knows?
Well, the atmosphere for it now, after the way the genre has been going, has got to be just right.
Well, they say that if a mediocre movie like Men in Black, and we all had hoped Men in Black would be great, but it was kind of mediocre. It did $230 million just here in the United States, so I would say that's more than encouraging.
Bob, are you going to act at all in the movie?
Well, but actually, I don't want them to make the movie.
You don't?
No.
Really? Why not?
You really haven't been.
He's afraid they'll make it outrageous and won't stick to the storyline.
Well,
the problem, Art.
Well, no,
he's probably right, by the way. They will,
Well, you have to. When you sign a contract for a movie deal, you have to sign, you have to sign away every right. I mean, they could turn it into anything they want. And so Bob has kept it close to the vest and restricts what they can portray. They can't portray any live aliens. And
I don't know. By the time it's over, you'll have little guys going, yak, 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 yak.
Well, not with my name on it.
Steven Seagal will be fighting them with a machine gun, probably.
Take me back to way before S4 and before Area 51 and all the rest of it, and just tell me something about yourself. I mean, how did you get interested in the things you're interested in that eventuated in your getting that job? How'd you get to be who you are?
I wonder how far I should go back. I guess at one point, I had moved to New Mexico in the early 80s, and that was to take on a job with Los Alamos National Lab.
What kind of work?
Well, that was physics. That was with at the Los Alamos Mason Physics Facility, which now has a different name.
Okay.
It's been quite a while ago. But at the time, we were running experiments on their linear accelerator there, and really looking into the basic makeup of matter.
That's pretty exciting. That's pretty exciting work. Period.
Oh, it was fantastic. It was a lot of fun working there. A very strange town to live in, but I enjoyed it quite a bit.
How long were you with them, with Los Alamos?
Los Alamos, I believe I was there only a couple years before I realized that, I could make a lot more money on my own just operating as a contractor and consulting for the lab as opposed to working for them.
That happens a lot.
Oh, and it was certainly worth doing. So I left the lab and at that time started Lazar Energy Systems. And we developed, designed, and repaired radiation detection equipment.
Radiation detection equipment?
Specifically alpha radiation detection, which is the type of particles given off by plutonium. And Los Alamos, making bombs and that sort of thing, has a lot of plutonium laying around, so they want to be able to detect even minute particles that may cling to clothing, so on and so forth.
So in other words, this was a sort of a protective detective device.
Right.
For human beings.
They essentially frisk you with it when you leave. It also scans the floors and cars as they leave, too.
Was that a pretty good business to be in?
It was fantastic.
Huh.
It was absolutely fantastic at the time. And we were awarded a government contract about 4 years in a row, and things were great. Well, I did still go down to the lab a lot because I knew people there, and one day there was a local Los Alamos newspaper called The Monitor.
Right.
And, at the time I was building all kinds of strange projects and was really into building things with jet engines in them and built...
Really?
Yeah, race cars, and I even built a little Honda passenger car that had a jet engine in it.
Jet engine?
Yeah.
In a car?
Yeah,
how does that work, Bob? How does a jet engine in a car work? I mean, there's this famous myth of the guy who plowed himself into a mountain with some jets. I mean, how does a jet
That
work?
was a JATO rocket.
That JATO rocket, that's
right.
it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a famous urban legend.
It is. But in real life, how in God's name do you...
In real life, this was, I think it was, I don't remember the year, a 1980 something or other Honda Civic, which had the engine up front.
Right.
And in the back I installed a jet engine. So you could drive the car around normally, and then push a lever and the license plate would open up, exposing the nozzle to the jet. You could fire that up and take off at high speed. And they had put that on, I think it's the June 82 front page of the Monitor newspaper. And
what kind of jet engine was that? Do you recall?
It's a pressure jet engine, which is kind of it's a jet engine with no moving parts at all.
Right.
And you know, if you know how jet engines, turbojet engines, and the like work,
I do.
Generally, that's real confusing because you need some moving parts in there to make things go.
That's right.
And it's not a ramjet, and ramjets need to be moving extremely high speed before they can produce thrust. But this is kind of a strange hybrid, and it produces thrust statically without it moving.
That's really cool. How much thrust, do you know?
That was about 2,000 pounds.
2,000
pounds.
For
a 1,600-pound car, that was...
Yeah, oh yeah. So in other words, you're already moving at like, 50, 60 miles an hour when you let go?
Yeah, exactly.
And then what?
Well, and then you better hold on.
Yeah, well, how fast? I mean, it takes you from 60 to what?
212 was the fastest we ever had that car going.
212 miles an hour?
Yeah.
You out your mind. Where were you driving these things?
The high-speed run was done at El Mirage Dry Lake in California. And the car was pretty much retired after that because it was a unibody construction and the whole car started pretty much bending from all the forces.
What?
But, I mean, the only reason I brought up the whole jet car thing was that...
you were the driver, right?
Right.
Did you have a death wish?
No, that kind of stuff isn't dangerous if you know what you're doing.
Well, I mean, for example, the car had shaken apart during, maximum thrust.
Yeah, but it didn't.
Well, right, it didn't, but it bent itself up pretty well, huh?
Yeah, that was kind of expected.
I know that you have a car that I remember when we interviewed before. You had built a car that runs on hydrogen, also, right? Yeah,
that was a 1978 Trans Am, and in fact, I entered that in an alternate fuels contest, which was a race at that time from Woodland Hills to California to Kitt Peak, Arizona, and it drove nonstop there on one tank of fuel.
Well, that's interesting because that's a long time ago, and now all of a sudden President Bush is saying we are going to begin moving toward a hydrogen economy. Well,
we should. I mean, it's the perfect fuel. In fact, I was just talking to my girlfriend the other day saying I think I'm going to go ahead and convert our existing car over.
Really?
And I kind of miss making my own fuel. I mean, it's essentially free.
Okay, but here's the question, and I talked to a lot of people about this, Bob. Right now, I think the oil companies imagine hydrogen is fine because, they'll use fossil fuels to put the hydrogen, to create the hydrogen, get it in the cells. You still have to use energy to make energy, right?
However, there are other ways. Now, of course, the oil companies and the gas companies want you to crack hydrogen from methane or some other hydrocarbon fuel.
Absolutely.
And that's ridiculous. You're defeating the whole purpose of using hydrogen. Water is H2O.
Yeah.
Now, every school kid knows you take a glass of water, add just a drop of salt in there to get the ions moving around, and take a 12-volt battery and put the positive and negative leads in there. You see one lead let off a little bit of bubbles, and the other lead lets off twice as much bubbles. Well, the lead with twice as much bubbles is the H2, and the O2 is coming off the other one. So just running a little electricity through water gives you a flammable gas.
And
that's the way to make hydrogen.
Okay. So other than the creation of the voltage to do that, which...
Well, the way I had done it before was I had a fairly large solar array, And what that did was during the day, it took and cracked the using an electrolysis setup,
Right.
which is what I just described, cracked the hydrogen out of water, and during the night, it was pressurized using the available water pressure into the hydrogen tanks, which contained an iron titanium hydride. It's kind of a granular substance that absorbs hydrogen like a sponge soaks up water, as opposed to just compressing a tank with hydrogen, which is a dangerous...
I was about to ask you, in this process, is there a danger?
No, once it's chemically stored in the hydride, you can shoot incendiary bullets at the tank, and it just does nothing but smolder.
But the gas itself could be dangerous.
Yeah, but the tank only produces as much gas as the car needs at the time.
Gotcha.
The way the setup that I came up with is that the car radiator fluid heats an outer jacket on the tank, and when the hydride heats up, it evolves hydrogen, and it gets into the carburetor. So there's never more than the volume of hydrogen that fits in the tube from the tank to the carburetor or fuel injection system. So it was a very safe system.
All right. What about the car itself? The performance of the car compared to a piston engine. What was the performance like?
We're talking about the hydrogen car or the jet?
Oh, no, the jet. I can imagine that. the hydrogen car.
The hydrogen car. It is a piston car, and the beauty of the system is you can convert any existing piston car to run on hydrogen.
Yes, but
you just need to retard the timing because hydrogen burns so much faster. The flame front just flashes through the cylinders and it'll cause detonation or knocking. But with a couple minor modifications, any car can run on it. And you do lose a little horsepower because there's a difference between spraying a flammable gas in there as opposed to having, a liquid hydrocarbon with all that carbon energy in there.
Well, when you say a little, how much real difference in performance?
Well, I lost a significant amount in the Trans Am, and probably I believe the car was 220 horsepower, and I think I was down to about 150 running on hydrogen.
Oh, but still usable then.
Oh, yeah, you weren't following electric cars by any means.
Well, that's pretty good. That's damn good, actually. So why not do that now to all cars?
I am. I'm going to convert my car over, but
you already told your wife is okay with this, right?
Right.
Oh yeah.